Are you planning a thru hike of the Appalachian Trail? Then let's talk through logistics. Hey guys, if you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Audrey, known as Glowstick on Trail. If you're coming back again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. Since it's logistically easier to start northbound, and most of you are going to be going northbound from Georgia to Maine, let's start with the northbounders and how to get to the trail. Okay, so most people don't actually start their hike at Springer Mountain because they do the approach trail ahead of that. So the approach trail is just under 9 miles and it starts at Amicalola Falls State Park in Georgia. And basically it just starts you out real tough and gets you ready for the journey ahead because you have to go up what feels like a million stairs up the side of a waterfall in order to finish the approach trail. So, it gets your blood pumping right away, lets you know what you're in for. Very exciting. You can technically start right at Springer Mountain or like a half mile from Springer Mountain, but logistically it's a lot more difficult because in order to get there, you have to drive on a back dirt road. And from what I've heard, you have to have like a 4-wheel drive and a high clearance vehicle. So most people just go ahead and start right at Amicalola Falls. And Amicalola is where the famous archway is that everyone walks under to start their journey northbound. So I think you should do the approach trail. That's my opinion. What's an extra, 9 miles in the grand scheme of almost 2,200? You might as well just start it. And the beauty of starting at Amicalola also is that there are volunteers and rangers right there to help you, people that will give you a shakedown, that will give you a pep talk, that will kind of give you some things in advance that you might want to know, or like emergency preparedness and lots of tips and encouragement. When Ivex and I started our journey at Amicalola Falls, I got a shakedown. My pack was way too heavy. And also like a lot of encouragement from, I'm not sure if they were volunteers or rangers, but this guy said to us, "You two are gonna make it to Katahdin. I can tell. I've been doing this a long time and I can tell you two are gonna make it." And maybe he says that to everyone, I don't know, but it sure was encouraging when we were starting out this journey that we didn't know how we were gonna do or if we were gonna like it, or I think that we were going in with some trepidation. We were massively excited but also nervous, so it was nice to get that encouragement right ahead of time. And we also met people on the approach trail that we became such good friends with and knew for the entire trail and still talk to today. So I recommend that if you're going northbound, you do start at Amicalola and do the approach trail. Okay, so how do you actually get there? So most people are gonna either fly or take the train or take the bus into Georgia. I didn't. I actually got a ride from Ivex's mom. She picked me up in Asheville, North Carolina and drove us to the start of the trail, but that's obviously not the norm unless you have a family or friend down in Georgia who's willing to drive you. So most people, let's just assume they start in Atlanta. They arrive at the Atlanta airport. So your best option is, and this might really be your only true option, to be honest, but it's to get a shuttle. And there are shuttle services that will pick you up right at the Atlanta airport. I'm not sure what the pricing is, but I did find some resources on getting to the beginning of the trail, which I'll put below with some information about shuttles. So some will pick you right up at the Atlanta airport. I also saw that there is a MARTA train station that goes from the airport, and this will take you north. So if you go to the train station and you take it north, you can take it to a town called Sandy Springs. And in Sandy Springs, there is an REI. And apparently this REI offers shuttle services to the Appalachian Trail. I assume that there is a fee with this, so you'd have to call and check with this particular store. But that's a pretty good option because it gets you, north of the airport, so you're not having someone come pick you up in Atlanta. You're actually getting a little closer to the trail. So I just assume taking a shuttle from Sandy Springs is going to be cheaper from taking one from Atlanta. But if you don't want to deal with the hassle of that, then you can just get a private shuttle from the Atlanta airport. I found a pretty decent article about accessing the Appalachian Trail from the Trek, and the Trek lists some shuttle services. I'm not sure if they're still running during COVID. I assume that some are, but I'm not sure which are and which aren't. So you'd have to take a look and give those people a call or contact them and just see what's available and how much it'll cost. Just note that there is a small fee to get into Amicalola Falls State Park. But once you're there, you can just hop on the approach trail and start your journey north to Maine. Okay, if you are coming the other way, if you're a southbounder coming from Maine to Georgia, it's a little more complicated because the Appalachian Trail does start at the top of a mountain, at the top of Mount Katahdin, at the highest point in Maine. Okay, so the closest airport to Baxter State Park, which is where Katahdin is and where the trail starts, or ends, depending on which area you're going, but southbounders, where the trail starts, is Bangor. So you can fly into Bangor, and from there, you can take a bus to Medway. And Medway is apparently about a 20-minute drive from Millinocket, and Millinocket is the closest town to Baxter State Park. You can also fly into Portland, Maine, but that's gonna be farther away than Bangor. So Bangor is about 90 miles or an hour and a half away, whereas Portland is about 200 miles away or about a 3-hour drive. So Bangor's your best bet if you can get a ticket into there, but it can be expensive to fly in or out of Bangor. Anyway, just like if you were going northbound, once you get to the closest point, which in this case is Medway via public transportation, then you could hire a shuttle service to take you actually into Baxter State Park. But just know, again, there is a small fee to get into Baxter State Park. Once you get into Baxter State Park, you actually have to secure a permit in order to climb up Katahdin. So in order to start your journey on the Appalachian Trail, you have to secure a permit, and you get this permit at the Katahdin Stream Campground Ranger Station. You must do this before you start hiking up Katahdin. The shortest route up Katahdin is the Able Trail. This is about 4.4 miles. So you have to climb up to the top of Katahdin, and then you actually have to turn around and climb back down in order to start your journey southbound. Just be aware that the Able Trail is not open all year round. It usually opens around June 1st. So you can't actually get a permit to start your journey until that trail is actually open for the year, depending on weather and whatnot. Be aware, hiking up Katahdin was the hardest climb of the entire AT, in my opinion, possibly rivaled by the Kinsmans in the White Mountains or the Wildcats. But seriously, this is no joke. Like, if you're a shorty like me, there are times when you're gonna have to literally climb up things. So it is tough if you're going southbound. So just be prepared for that. The rangers ask you to start your hike up Katahdin pretty early in the morning because for some people it takes them a long time. It takes them all day. I did it at the end of my hike, so I think it took my family and I like 3 or 4 hours, but obviously we were in amazing thru-hiker shape by the time that we got there. So if you're just starting out the journey, then it'll probably take you a little bit longer unless you've done a lot of work getting in shape ahead of the trail. If you get to Katahdin Stream Campground later in the day and you're not actually able to start your hike up Katahdin that day, you have to wait till the next day. There is a campground right there called the Birches that you can pay $10 to stay at. It is first come, first served, but I kind of assume that at this time of year during Sobo season rather than Nobo season, it's probably not going to be filled up. And this campground is for thru hikers. Anyway, once you climb up to Katahdin, retrace your steps back down or even take a different trail down depending on what you would like to do, and then start your journey southbound on the Appalachian Trail. If you are a flip-flopper, obviously I can't get into specifics because I don't know where you're going to start your journey, but all along the AT, there are tons of shuttle services and trail angels and lots of people in the AT community that are probably willing to help you. So I would just say look into maybe AWOL, look at the Trek, look at White Blaze, look at Far Out, which used to be known as Gut Hook, and just see what shuttle services are available depending on where you're flying in and where you intend to actually start your journey. And same thing, I'm sure that you can secure a shuttle to get you to the start of the trail, wherever it is you're wanting to start, if you don't have a friend or family member right in that area. I can't stress this enough, there is so much support along the AT, like such an amazing community, such amazing trail angels. You will get there. It will not be a huge deal. Okay, so you've gotten to the start of the trail. Now, how do you know where to go? Because spoiler, when you're going northbound on the AT, the trail is not always going north. And when you're going southbound, the trail is not always going south. Sometimes you'll find yourself going east, west, north, south, and you'll be like, why am I doing this right now? But it doesn't matter. Eventually you get to Georgia or eventually you get to Maine, depending on which way you're going. Okay, so I had AWOL while I was on the trail. I actually had a book and I would just tear out the pages as I went, so I didn't have to carry the whole book at one time. But that's kind of the old school way to do it. I really enjoyed AWOL actually because it gives you the mileage along the side of the book, and then it tells you like all these different things that you run into, like water sources, campgrounds, shelters, landmarks, that sort of thing. And then there are special pages for when you get to towns, like what restaurants are there, what hostels, what hotels, what shuttle services, all that good stuff. So it had all of this information really conveniently in this book, but you know, books are heavy and it's not interactive. But AWOL does also have a PDF version that you can just download on your phone if you would like to use AWOL. I did really like it, and I kind of wish that there was an AWOL for the PCT as well, because I want to do the PCT in the future, and if so, I'd probably get the PDF version. But I also now use the Far Out app, which used to be known as Guthook, and that's interactive. It's right on your phone. It shows you all those same sorts of things, but it'll actually show you like exactly what mile point you're at, where you are on the trail, and then you can look ahead on the app to see like where the towns are, where the water source is, all that good stuff, and how far those things are from you. And as you're going uphill, it'll show you the grade. It's really cool. So I definitely use Far Out now, and I will be using it for future through hikes. Like they have it not just for the AT, but many trails, like some of the shorter long trails, and of course the very long trails. But I would definitely recommend getting the Far Out app. It's by far the most popular navigation system that people use, like as far as I can tell, on all of the long trails now. But that being said, there are some other ones out there. I'm just not as familiar, so I can't recommend one of the other ones. But those are two really good options, AWOL and Far Out. All right, now that you're headed on your way up or down the Appalachian Trail, where do you sleep at night? Okay, so for the most part, people either stay in shelters or campsites, and often the shelters will have campsites right at them, and it'll tell you that in AWOL or Far Out, and it'll tell you how many spaces there are as well. So the shelters, when you start in Georgia, they're spaced out, so they're only a few miles apart. And then as you go northbound on the AT, they're kind of a little bit more spaced out, because it's like, all right, you're not just going to want to go a few miles during the day. You're probably going to spread that out more as you get more and more fit. But if you stay in the shelters, just know that you will be sleeping probably next to strangers. You'll be sleeping probably next to snorers. There will be mice running around. But some people really love the shelters, and the shelter system is really cool. It's part of what makes the AT, and you know, they're historic, and there's a lot of really cool history there. But I'm not a shelter person, if you couldn't tell. I like to set up my tent. And then of course other people like to hammock. My friend Dory swears by hammocking. I mean, I think laying in a hammock is so freaking comfortable, but I like the privacy of a tent, which is another reason I don't like shelters, because I like to be able to set up my tent and change in there and clean up and all that good stuff. So it's up to you, tent, shelter, hammock, whatever, but you can figure out where those points are to stay and plan your day out according to that by using a system like AWOL or Far Out. Okay, so next up, how do you get to towns? So the AT goes through some towns, but that's not the norm. It is really cool when it does though, because then it's obviously like the town is a big part of the AT community. Like they're really used to hikers, and it's nice when you don't have to figure out how to get to town. You just walk there. But like I said, that's not the norm. Most of the towns along the AT are a few miles away from the AT. There are no really long drives that I really remember to have to get to a town, but basically your options are you can walk. Most people don't do that because you're walking enough out there. You can take a shuttle. Cell phone service can be spotty out there, but I noticed that most of the time if I was on top of a mountain, I would have cell phone reception, and you can find information about those shuttles on Far Out, on AWOL, or a lot of times they'll be listed like at road crossings. There might be community boards with information about shuttles, or you make a reservation to stay in a hotel or hostel in the town and they might have a shuttle service. So I would just say, if you're going to call a shuttle service, make sure that you are paying attention to when you have service, because a lot of the roads that you catch are down in the gaps along the AT, and down in the gaps you often don't have cell phone reception. So you might have to call ahead of time once you're up at a mountain and be like, I think I'm going to be there at this time, can I get a shuttle? And then the third option is you hitchhike, which I would say this is by far the most popular option on the AT. Obviously this does come with some risk, so I'm not going to be the one to tell you that like, oh, you have to hitchhike or you should hitchhike, because it's all about the risk that you are willing to take. But I had really good experiences hitchhiking. I was really shy and scared about doing it at first, but I got really used to it and met some really amazing people. And again, a lot of the AT communities are just really used to hikers and willing to help them. And especially down south toward the beginning of the trail, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, I felt like there was so much support down there. There were church groups willing to shuttle hikers. There were lots of community members. Like, people down there are just so hospitable and amazing and kind to hikers. I mean, I saw that all up and down the AT, of course, but I just felt like it was another level when I was down south. So I feel like that's maybe it's a good place to get used to hitchhiking. I was doing shuttles at first or occasionally Ubers, but I really found once I got used to hitchhiking, I enjoyed it and really appreciated so much the people that were willing to take a risk and let smelly hikers into their vehicle. And then, of course, when you're coming out of town, same thing. You can walk, you can shuttle, you can hitchhike. And when you're in the towns, obviously there are usually hostels and hotels that cater to hikers, and then you can usually walk to the grocery store or Walmart or restaurant or however you want to do your resupply. And you can also mail yourself resupply boxes if you wish. I didn't do that. I didn't think that it was worth it. Like, you hit so many towns along the AT, you never have to carry food for more than really like 4 or 5 days, maybe a few more once you're really up north in the wilderness like in Maine. But for most of the trail, you're not carrying for more than 4 or 5 days. So I really didn't see a need to send myself resupply boxes, and I wouldn't recommend it unless you have certain dietary restrictions, but obviously that's totally up to you. But most of the AT towns have post offices, and that's another thing that's listed in AWOL. I assume it's listed in Far Out as well, although I actually have only used Far Out for a shorter hike, so I haven't noticed if there are post offices, but I assume that there are. And you can obviously like send yourself stuff to those post offices, and then if you arrive at a post office and you find that you don't actually need those items until maybe a later town, you can for free send it up to another post office as long as it has arrived at a post office. So that's pretty cool. I would also occasionally, have stuff sent to me on trail, either from friends or family or things that I would buy online if I wanted like a certain food or I needed a new piece of gear. And so you can actually have stuff sent to you via, US mail to different post offices. If it's FedEx or UPS, you are going to have to send it elsewhere. They don't generally accept those at the post office, or sometimes if they do, they'll charge you an extra fee. But you can generally have those sent to a hotel or hostel as long as you are going to be staying there. Okay, let's talk permits. Unlike the PCT or some of the other shorter long trails, you don't need a permit in order to hike the Appalachian Trail. You only need 2 short-term permits, not a permit for the entire AT. You just need 2 short-term permits in order to hike the entire AT, which is, I already mentioned the one at Baxter State Park in order to hike up Katahdin. And the only other one that you need is a backcountry permit in order to hike through the Great Smoky Mountains. And they have specific permits for thru hikers. These permits cost $20. You can get them up to 30 days in advance of when you'll be in the Smokies, and you need to actually print this permit out. I believe that I printed mine at a hotel or a hostel in Franklin, North Carolina. So just plan ahead and know that you will need to have a paper copy. But this permit, you basically, once you get to the Smokies, you write your date and you put half of it into a permit box, and you have 8 days then to make it through the Smoky Mountains. I was not a super fast hiker by any stretch of the imagination, and I think that I made it through the Smokies in 6 days. So I think that 8 days is plenty of time. And I did just note that I did actually have a couple of people, trail ridge runners or whatever they're called. I did have a couple of people check my permit, so just be aware that they do actually check. And I think that, I've heard people be like, oh, I don't want to pay the $20 for this, whatever. But just remember that the national parks are underfunded, and $20, I think to most of us, I don't want to make assumptions about people's financial situation, but to most of us, $20 isn't a big deal. So, it's supporting the park, and then you are probably going to get it checked. So just save yourself some stress and pay for the permit ahead of time. It's not a huge deal. The Smokies are actually kind of tricky for another reason, and that other reason is that you can't stealth camp. You can't just find a space to camp that looks good. You have to actually stay at the shelters, And if you arrive at the shelter and the shelter is not full of hikers, you actually are supposed to stay in the shelter rather than setting up your tent or your hammock. For someone like me who hates staying in the shelters, it could be a little stressful, but you know, honestly, the number of thru hikers is going up every year, and I found that most of the shelters when I got there were actually full and I was able to stay in my tent. I only stayed in one shelter for the entire time I was in the Smokies, and that was the very first night. But what else can make it stressful is that other backpackers that are coming through the Smokies can actually reserve shelter space ahead of time. And if they arrive at the shelter and the shelter is full, then thru hikers actually have to get out of the shelter and then go set up their hammock or tent and give up that space to the people who've reserved it in advance. But it's kind of tricky because you don't know, like you arrive at the shelter, you don't know if there are, you know, other backpackers coming, like section hikers coming or not. It's just sort of a guessing game. And if you're the last person to get space in the shelter, then you're gonna have to be the one to actually give up your space in the shelter to these section hikers. But yeah, it's kind of a pain because you don't know if they're gonna show up. Like you might get there at 4 p.m. and they might not get there until like nighttime. You don't know, but then you have to give your space up. But I mean, it is what it is. Take it up with the National Park Service. I'm just sharing the information. If you're hiking with a dog, so this is the same as the permit system. There's only 2 places on the entire AT you can't bring your dog, and that is in the Great Smoky Mountains and in Baxter State Park in Maine. So you will have to board your animal in order to go through the Smokies or go into Baxter State Park. But there are apparently services like right outside of the park that will actually come pick up your dog and board them, obviously for a fee, and then they'll bring your dog back to you once you're out of the Smokies. So that's just a side note. I did actually see several dogs out there. I will just note that many of them didn't seem super healthy out there. Like, I'm not saying their owners weren't taking care of them. I just think that a long distance hike is really tough on their bodies and their paws. So if you're considering bringing a dog, but you're not sure, I would probably recommend that you don't. But you know your dog better than anyone and you know what they can handle, and it's totally up to you, obviously. So that's just my 2 cents. But again, not judging you if you do bring your dog. I did meet a couple of dogs out there who really seem to be loving their life and who are well taken care of, and et cetera, et cetera. So obviously make the decision that's best for you and your animal. Okay, and then finishing the trail, obviously these details are exactly the same as when I was talking about starting the trail. So obviously if you are a northbounder, you're gonna end up finishing the trail at Katahdin. So then you have to kind of figure out how to get home from Katahdin. I think the easiest way is to hitchhike out of Baxter State Park, get to Millinocket, and then get a shuttle from there, or get a shuttle to the bus over in Medway to get to Bangor, all that. I got lucky in that Ivex's boyfriend boy band actually came to finish the trail with her. So he ended up driving us to Portland, Maine, and then he actually gave me a ride to Boston, and my brother was living near Boston at the time, who bought me a plane ticket out of there. But for most people, I think that they end up getting a shuttle out of Millinocket or something like that. And then also, if you are finishing the trail at Katahdin, same thing as for those southbounders. When they started, they had to get a permit to go up Katahdin. So when you are finishing northbound at Katahdin, you also have to get the same permit. So just be aware of that. And then same thing, you can stay the night before at the Birches campground, but it is a little more competitive for space during northbound season. And then if you're finishing the trail at Springer Mountain, same thing, you're gonna end up getting a shuttle, probably either from Springer or from Amicalola Falls State Park, and then going probably to the Atlanta airport, depending on where it is you're going back to. Okay, and lastly, I just wanna give a little note about gear. Obviously, do your own gear research, bring what you think is best. If things aren't working along the trail, there are lots of outdoor outfitters that you can actually get new stuff and swap out your gear and all that good stuff. But I just want to make a note that I was really surprised going into the AT how very cold it was down south in Georgia especially, but also sometimes North Carolina or Tennessee. And I had a 0-degree sleeping bag and a fleece and a puffy and Under Armour and all this stuff, and I was still really cold. And I was just very surprised at how cold it was. I woke up my first morning on the trail, so my second day, my first morning on the trail, and frost was covering everything. There was snow, there was icicles. I had the coldest night of my life that second night on trail. I think that it got down to 6 degrees, and I started March 20th, and I was freezing for a straight month. I was wearing all my clothes all the time. Like when I finally like took off some of them and was wearing just like a short, like shorts and a tank top, people were like, oh, there you are. You've been hiding under all of those layers. So just be prepared for some very cold weather if you're starting the trail in Georgia in the early spring. And I also just want to note that people are surprised often about the cost of a thru hike. According to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, it usually costs people about $1,000 per month, and I found that to be pretty accurate. And for most people, it's going to take them between 5 and 7 months to complete a thru hike. So just assume your on-trail expenses are going to be between about $5,000 to $7,000. Can you do this cheaper? Yes, absolutely you can. Can you do this for more money? Yes, of course you can. Obviously, it depends a lot on your lifestyle as a thru hiker, like how often you're going into towns, how often you're staying in hotels and hostels, how much of your gear you have to replace, what the quality and amount of food is that you're eating, how often you're going to restaurants, all that good stuff. Like there are a lot of factors at play there, but typically it is going to cost between $5,000 to $7,000. And don't forget to save some extra money in case of things like injury, like you might end up having to nurse an injury for a few days in a hotel, or you might have to pay some doctor's bills while you're out there. Be prepared for that. And then also save some money for your, just to get your life jump started again once you get off the trail. A lot of people quit their jobs in order to thru hike, give up their apartments if they're not homeowners, etc. So you are going to need some money once you get off the trail to hold you over until you do start working again. Okay, so those are the logistics of thru hiking the Appalachian Trail. If I missed any big categories that you're curious about, please drop those in the comments. Or if you have any specific questions about hiking the Appalachian Trail, please let me know. I always love hearing from you guys, and thank you for being here. I appreciate the support, and I'll talk to you all later.